Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel for another deep dive into the heart of Genoa City. Today is a rather heavy, emotionally charged day as we unpack some truly devastating developments. We are about to witness the absolute breaking point of a family we once rooted for so deeply. Grab a warm cup of tea, settle in, and let's unravel this heartbreaking chapter together. The courtroom doors, they always seem so incredibly heavy, don't they? Like they are specifically designed to seal away the warmth, the light, and the compassion of the outside world. When Abby and Devon walked through those heavy oak doors for their preliminary custody hearing, you could almost physically feel the chill in the air, the kind of biting, unforgiving cold that only comes when a profound, passionate love turns into something completely unrecognizable. It's honestly hard to even process how we got here. How they got here. I mean, just a short time ago, they were the absolute picture of a modern, unconventional, but deeply loving family. They had overcome so many insurmountable odds just to bring baby Dominic into the world. And now they are standing on opposite sides of a sterile courtroom, armed to the teeth with ruthless lawyers and devastating secrets. It's profoundly sad to watch a marriage dissolve, not with a quiet, tearful conversation in their living room, but with a brutal, public execution of each other's character. You look at Abby as she takes her seat, and you see a mother who is just entirely driven by a primal, almost desperate need to protect her child. I keep thinking about what she must have been feeling the night before this hearing. The endless sleeplessness, the suffocating anxiety, the sheer, unadulterated terror of losing control over her son's environment and safety. She didn't want it to come to this, we know she didn't. She just wanted Devon to sign that new legal agreement. The one that would simply limit Mariah's visitation rights and establish clear, safe boundaries. To Abby, it was a simple, logical equation of maternal safety. Mariah had suffered a severe mental breakdown. She had actually kidnapped Dominic. In Abby's mind, placing strict boundaries isn't an act of malice. It is just basic, undeniable maternal instinct. But Devon's flat refusal to sign that paper, citing Mariah's spiritual connection to the baby. It just completely shattered Abby's trust. It was the spark that ignited this whole terrifying inferno. And then there's Devon. It's so incredibly complicated when you try to sit back and truly understand his perspective. He isn't acting out of intentional cruelty, at least not initially. He truly, deeply believes he is doing the absolute right thing. He looks at Mariah and he sees the woman who gave them the greatest, most precious gift imaginable. A woman who sacrificed her own body, her own comfort, and ultimately her own sanity to bring Dominic into their lives. He feels this immense, crushing, lifelong debt of gratitude, mixed with his own very complex feelings about family, loyalty, and abandonment. But, in his desperate attempt to protect Mariah's fragile emotional well-being, he completely and utterly invalidated his own wife's very real, very justified fears. He called Abby cruel. That word, cruel, it must have echoed in Abby's head on an endless, agonizing loop. How do you look at the person you vowed to spend your entire life with, the father of your child, and hear him call your desperate protective instincts cruel? The atmosphere in the courtroom was just suffocating. Thick with unspoken resentments, years of buried grievances, and the palpable tension of a storm about to break. When the judge finally called the room to order, the silence was deafening. You could see Abby gripping the edge of the defendant's table. Her knuckles stark white, her posture rigid, her breathing shallow. She had spent days, maybe weeks, meticulously, painfully gathering her evidence. She wasn't just walking in there with raw emotions and tearful pleas. She was walking in with a devastatingly clinical, heavily documented dossier of Mariah's darkest, most unstable moments. It's painful to even think about what it takes to compile something like that. To sit down with lawyers and systematically document the mental collapse of a woman you once considered a dear friend, a surrogate, a vital part of your family. But Abby felt she had absolutely no other choice. She felt entirely cornered by Devon's stubborn obstinance. When Abby's legal team began their presentation, the air in the room seemed to get even thinner, almost impossible to breathe. They didn't hold back, not even a little bit. They laid out the precise, harrowing timeline of Mariah's postpartum psychosis, the erratic, unpredictable behavior, the severe emotional instability, and of course, the climax of it all, the kidnapping. The kidnapping, that word alone carries so much devastating weight. Hearing it spoken aloud in a sterile, echoing courtroom, formally entered into the official legal record as a weapon to be used, it was incredibly jarring. Abby watched the judge's face intently, desperate for some sign of validation, some nod of understanding. She needed the court to see exactly what she saw, a volatile, unpredictable threat to her son's stability and safety. She presented thick stacks of medical records, sworn witness statements, every single painful, excruciating detail of Mariah's breakdown. It was a surgical, merciless dismantling of Mariah's character, aimed directly at proving she was fundamentally unfit to be anywhere near Dominic without strict, court-ordered supervision. Sitting directly across the aisle, Devon was forced to listen to this relentless barrage. This systematic attack on a woman he felt deeply, personally protective of. You could clearly see the muscles in his jaw clenching and unclenching. the dark, turbulent storm brewing in his eyes. He must have felt a profound, overwhelming sense of failure. Failure to mediate this conflict, failure to protect Mariah from this brutal public humiliation, and ultimately, failure to keep his own family intact. But as Abby's legal presentation went on, as the accusations piled higher and higher, something fundamental shifted within Devon. The deep sorrow in his eyes started to harden into something else entirely. Something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous. He realized, with a sickening clarity, that Abby wasn't just trying to set reasonable boundaries. She was trying to completely, legally erase Mariah from their lives forever. And by extension, she was directly challenging Devon's judgment, his authority, and his role as a father. And Devon, well, Devon is a Winters. He has a legacy of pride and fierce loyalty. He doesn't back down when he feels his definition of family is being threatened, even if that devastating threat is coming from his own wife. I really think this was the exact, precise moment the point of no return was crossed in their relationship. Up until this specific juncture, there might have been a tiny, incredibly fragile sliver of hope that they could somehow step back from the ledge, that they could pause the agonizing proceedings, walk out into the quiet hallway, and just talk to each other like human beings who once shared a profound love. But when Abby's lawyer finally finished painting Mariah as a dangerous, highly unstable element, the line was permanently, deeply drawn in the sand. Devon felt entirely cornered, backed against a legal wall. And what do people do when they are cornered and fighting for what they believe is right? They lash out. They reach for whatever weapons they have at their disposal, regardless of the collateral damage. Devon's legal team slowly stood up, and the entire energy in the room violently shifted from Abby's offensive strike to Devon's impending, devastating counterattack. No one, absolutely no one in that room was prepared for what Devon did next. It's one thing to aggressively defend Mariah, to present compelling medical evidence of her recovery, or to eloquently argue the psychological benefits of her continued supportive presence in Dominic's life. That would have been the standard, expected legal route. That would have been playing by the unwritten rules of a marital dispute, but Devon didn't just defend Mariah. He went on a full-blown, merciless offensive against Abby. He decided, in that moment of anger and perceived righteousness, that if Abby was going to ruthlessly question Mariah's mental stability, he was going to ruthlessly question Abby's. It was a breathtakingly brutal tactic, a scorched earth, take-no-prisoners strategy that left everyone in the courtroom, including the seasoned judge, in a state of absolute, stunned disbelief. Devon's lawyers began producing their own documents. Thick, heavy files filled with intimate, deeply buried details of Abby's past. They didn't just bring up recent marital arguments or minor disagreements. They dug deep, painfully deep, into the darkest archives of Abby's life. They brought up her well-documented history of impulsive, reckless behavior. The times she had acted erratically in her youth, the moments of profound emotional instability that she had worked so incredibly hard to overcome, to heal from, and to leave in the distant past. It was as if Devon had taken every single vulnerable confession Abby had ever whispered to him in the dark, quiet safety of the night. Every deep-seated insecurity she had entrusted to him as her husband, and completely weaponized it. He laid her bare, exposing her most painful flaws before the cold, judging eyes of the court, painting a picture of a mother who was just as flawed, just as potentially unstable, and just as risky as the woman she was currently accusing. Watching Abby's face as Devon's lawyers coldly read out these intimate, painful, deeply personal details, it was genuinely agonizing to witness. You could physically see the massive wave of betrayal washing over her, drowning her in an instant. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking ashen and fragile. Her eyes widened in a heartbreaking mixture of absolute horror, shock, and profound, soul-crushing heartbreak. This was the man she loved more than anyone. This was the man who had held her tightly when she cried over her past mistakes, who had promised to protect her from the world, who knew her deepest, darkest insecurities and had sworn to her that they didn't matter, that he loved her all the more for them. And now, here he was, standing across a courtroom, using those exact, sacred insecurities to destroy her credibility as a mother in a court of law. It wasn't just a clever legal maneuver, it was a deeply personal, unforgivable violation of her soul. I keep trying to put myself in Abby's shoes at that exact, terrifying moment. Trying to imagine the sheer, nauseating vertigo of realizing that the person you trust most in the entire world is actively, deliberately trying to dismantle your life and your reputation. She had fully expected a tough fight over Mariah. She had mentally and emotionally prepared for complex legal arguments regarding visitation schedules, supervised visits, and psychiatric evaluations. But she had never, not in her wildest, most paranoid nightmares, anticipated that Devon would turn the gun directly on her. The dark secrets, the private moments of weakness, the times she felt she was failing, they were all being entered into evidence, stamped and filed for the public record. It was an absolute, total betrayal of the marital bond. How do you ever look at a person the same way after they've done something like that? How do you ever trust them with a single thought, a single fear, or a single secret ever again? And the truly tragic thing is, Devin knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't acting blindly. He knew precisely how much this would hurt her, how deeply it would cut. You could see the immense, tearing conflict in his body language. He wasn't sitting there with a smug, triumphant look of victory. He looked deeply pained. He looked like a man who was willingly cutting off his own arm just to save his life. He believed, with every single fiber of his being, that he absolutely had to do this to protect Dominic's vital connection to Mariah, to protect what he fundamentally saw as the true, inclusive, extended family dynamic that they had promised each other. In his mind, Abby's unilateral, aggressive decision to sue was a blatant act of war, a betrayal of their shared values, and he was simply returning fire to level the playing field. But the cost, the emotional, psychological collateral damage of that decision, it was absolutely catastrophic. The courtroom rapidly turned into a horrific battlefield of exposed wounds and shattered trust. It was no longer a noble pursuit about what was truly best for baby Dominic. It had devolved into a vicious, ugly contest of who could inflict the most damage, who could draw the most blood. They were literally tearing each other apart, piece by painful piece, right in front of the judge. Abby's lawyers objected, of course, their voices rising in indignation. They desperately tried to shut down Devin's relentless character assassination, arguing vehemently that Abby's past was entirely irrelevant to Mariah's current, proven threat level. But the devastating damage was already done. The judge had heard every word. The poisonous seeds of doubt had been firmly planted in the legal record. And far more importantly, the marriage itself had been fatally, irreparably struck. There was blood in the water, and both sides were just relentlessly, blindly circling each other, looking for the next weak spot to attack. As the preliminary hearing dragged on, minute by agonizing minute, the atmosphere grew increasingly, suffocatingly toxic. It was a masterclass in mutual, assured destruction. Abby, reeling and gasping for air from Devin's vicious attack, doubled down on her own offensive. If he was going to mercilessly expose her past, she was going to make absolutely sure the court understood the absolute, undeniable severity of Mariah's criminal actions. The back and forth was dizzying, exhausting. A relentless tennis match of trauma, accusations, and bitter recriminations. They weren't just fighting for custody or visitation rights anymore. They were fighting for their own personal narratives, their own desperate sense of righteousness. They were fighting to prove to themselves, and to the watching world, that they weren't the villain in this tragic story. Even as they both acted completely villainous, but in doing so, in fighting so dirty and so hard, they both inevitably became monsters in each other's eyes. And finally, Abby broke, the strong, resilient, impenetrable Newman facade. The heavy armor she had worn so tightly, so proudly into the courtroom that morning. It just completely and utterly shattered into a million pieces. She began to cry. And it wasn't a delicate, quiet, cinematic tear rolling down her cheek. It was a deep, visceral, body-shaking sobbing. It was the raw, unfiltered sound of a woman whose heart was being violently ripped out of her chest while she was still awake. She looked at Devin across the vast, cold expanse of the room, her eyes swimming in a sea of tears, and the look of sheer, unadulterated, helpless betrayal on her face. It's an image that will haunt this storyline, and these characters, forever. She felt entirely, completely alone in the universe. The man who was supposed to be her rock, her steadfast partner, her safe harbor against the storms of life, had just deliberately, coldly thrown her to the wolves. Devin saw her tears. He heard that gut-wrenching sob echo through the quiet courtroom. And for a split second, just a fleeting moment, you could almost see the heavy weight of regret flash across his face. The stark, undeniable reality of what he had just done, the sacred line he had just crossed, seemed to physically hit him. This was the woman he loved, the mother of his beloved child. Seeing her break down completely like that, knowing with absolute certainty that he was the one holding the hammer that smashed her, knowing he was the architect of her pain. It must have been an agonizing, sickening realization, but then the stubbornness, the deeply ingrained Winter's pride, set in again. He hardened his jaw, swallowing the lump in his throat. He desperately convinced himself that her tears were just the unfortunate, deeply regrettable, but entirely necessary price of protecting Dominic's broader family. He told himself over and over that he was doing the right thing. It's a terrifying thing to witness, isn't it? The extreme, devastating lengths we will go to, the immense pain we will willingly inflict on the people we claim to love, when we manage to convince ourselves that we are morally justified. I just can't help but think about little Dominic in all of this. This innocent, beautiful, completely helpless little boy who is blissfully, entirely unaware of the absolute, raging carnage happening in his name. He is the epic center of this war, the ultimate prize they are both fighting so viciously, so destructively for. But what kind of toxic, fractured environment are they creating for him to grow up in? When the dust finally settles, when the judge eventually bangs the gavel and makes a cold, legal ruling, Dominic is still going to have to go home. He is still going to have to be raised, day in and day out, by these two people. But how can they possibly co-parent effectively after this? How can they look at each other across a birthday cake, or sit next to each other at a school play, and not instantly remember the day they tried to completely destroy each other's lives in a court of law? The foundation of their co-parenting has been poisoned at the root. The judge. Honestly, I do not envy the judge in this horrific situation. How do you possibly sift through this massive mountain of mutual resentment, this tangled web of lies, secrets, and pain, and find the actual truth? How do you determine what is genuinely in the best interest of an innocent child when both of his parents are so completely blinded by their own profound pain, anger, and need for vengeance? The judge sat there, high above them, listening to these two wealthy, privileged, but deeply, deeply traumatized people tear each other to absolute shreds. It was a stark, sobering reminder that all the money, all the power, and all the prestige in Genoa City cannot protect you from the messy, brutal, devastating reality of human emotion when love turns sour. As the preliminary hearing finally, mercifully drew to a close, there was absolutely no sense of resolution in the room. There was no winner, there were only deeply wounded casualties. The judge, looking exhausted and grim, announced that a formal ruling would require significant further deliberation, and mandated comprehensive psychological evaluations for everyone involved, including Mariah. The words hung heavily in the air, a dark sentence of prolonged, agonizing uncertainty. The legal battle was, terrifyingly, just beginning, but the marital battle, the desperate war for the soul of their relationship, for the survival of their love, that was already over. It was dead. The casualties were laid out clearly on the courtroom floor for everyone to see, bleeding out from wounds they had inflicted on each other. When the judge finally dismissed them, the silence in the room returned, but it was a completely different kind of silence. It wasn't the tense, anticipatory, nervous silence of the morning. It was the heavy, suffocating, final silence of a graveyard. Abby slowly stood up, her face pale as a sheet, her eyes red, swollen, and entirely vacant. She didn't look at Devon. She couldn't even bring herself to glance in his direction. She just numbly gathered her things, flanked tightly by her whispering lawyers, and walked out of the courtroom like a hollow ghost. She was physically moving, but a vital, essential part of her. The part that believed in the sanctity of her marriage, the part that implicitly trusted Devon with her life and her heart, had died right there in that room. Devon remained seated at his table for a long moment after she left. He watched her back as she walked away, disappearing through those heavy oak doors. He had won the battle of the day, perhaps, by successfully muddying the legal waters, neutralizing Abby's attack on Mariah, and proving he wouldn't be bullied. He had fiercely protected his narrative and his extended family. But as he sat there in the suddenly empty, echoing courtroom, the hollow, Pyrrhic victory must have tasted exactly like ash in his mouth. He had defended Mariah, yes, he had stood his ground. But he had completely, irrevocably lost his wife. He had shattered his own family in a desperate, misguided attempt to save it. The tragic irony of it all is just, it's painfully, overwhelmingly sad. He truly believed he was doing the right thing for Dominic, but he had just absolutely guaranteed that his son would grow up in a fractured, deeply resentful, broken family dynamic. This entire, harrowing ordeal, it really makes you question everything you thought you knew about these characters. We always knew Abby had a fragile side, a complex history she tried so desperately to outrun and hide from the world. We always knew Devon had a highly complex relationship with loyalty, a deep-seated fear of abandonment, and a tendency to become overly, stubbornly protective of the people he felt indebted to. But to see these inherent character traits weaponized so ruthlessly, to see them used deliberately to inflict maximum, targeted pain on each other, it represents a profound, dark shift in their character arcs. They have crossed a massive, terrifying boundary that you just cannot ever uncross. You cannot unsay the vicious things that were said. You cannot unreveal the dark secrets that were exposed to the light. The innocence of their love is gone forever. And what about Mariah in all of this? We have to pause and think about her. She wasn't even physically present in the courtroom, but her heavy presence was felt in every single accusation, every single tear, every single objection. She is the silent, deeply troubled catalyst for the total destruction of the Winters household. Does she even know the full extent of the brutal war being fought over her? Does she truly understand that her lingering emotional bond with Dominic, her spiritual connection that Devon is so desperately, blindly trying to protect, has literally torn Abby and Devon's marriage to shreds? It's an incredibly heavy burden to bear, even if she is only indirectly responsible. The guilt, if she ever fully grasps the magnitude of the situation, must be completely overwhelming. Or perhaps, in her currently fragile, recovering state, she simply sees Devon as her one true champion, further complicating the already impossibly tangled web of loyalties and resentments. Looking ahead to the future, I just honestly don't see a viable path to reconciliation for them. I really, truly don't. Sometimes, a strong couple can survive infidelity. Sometimes they can survive financial ruin, devastating illness, or external tragedies. But surviving a deliberate, calculated, meticulously planned attempt to destroy each other's character in a public forum. Surviving the ultimate betrayal of your deepest, darkest, most closely guarded secrets being used as live ammunition against you by the person you sleep next to. That requires a level of superhuman forgiveness that I'm just not sure either Abby or Devon is capable of mustering right now, or ever. the foundational trust is completely gone. It hasn't just been broken, it has been pulverized into fine dust and blown away by the wind. The hatred, that's the word that really, truly sticks with me after watching this unfold. The hearing didn't end in sadness, or regret, or even anger. It ended in absolute, touchy utter hatred. Love doesn't just quietly evaporate into nothingness. When it is violently, deeply betrayed, it curdles and ferments into a toxic hatred. Abby hates Devon for his profound betrayal, for choosing Mariah's feelings over her fundamental safety and the safety of their infant son. Devon hates Abby for her perceived cruelty, for her cold attempt to unilaterally erase a vital, living part of their family history. They are now locked in a highly toxic, inescapable orbit, bound together only by their shared, desperate love for Dominic and their profound, simmering disdain for each other. The hope for a happy, peaceful, loving marriage. That beautiful dream is entirely, unequivocally dead. It vanished into thin air amidst the tears, the shouts, and the bitter accusations of that courtroom. We are now entering a completely new, dark era for Abby and Devon. It's an era of co-parenting through tightly gritted teeth, of communicating only through expensive lawyers and terse emails, of constant, paranoid suspicion and deep, lingering resentment. It's a tragic, heartbreaking end to a love story that started with so much genuine promise and hope. They fought so incredibly hard to build their family together, navigating the complexities of surrogacy, the terror of kidnapping, and countless other obstacles. And in the very end, the thing that completely destroyed them wasn't an external villain, a corporate rival, or a tragic accident, it was themselves. As we process this massive shift, we have to brace ourselves for the inevitable, explosive fallout. This isn't just going to affect Abby, Devon, and Dominic. This is going to send massive, destructive shockwaves through the entire Newman and Winters families. Victor Newman. We all know Victor. He is not going to sit idle by while his beloved daughter is publicly humiliated, betrayed, and dragged through the mud by her husband. He is going to unleash absolute hell on Devon. And the Winters family, already reeling and vulnerable from the shocking revelation about Holden and Malcolm's terrifying medical crisis, is going to find themselves painfully torn between supporting Devon and recognizing the sheer, undeniable brutality of his actions against Abby. The battle lines are being aggressively drawn, and the collateral damage across Genoa City is going to be immense and far-reaching. It's just so incredibly heavy, I find myself taking a deep, shuddering breath just thinking about the massive emotional weight these actors are going to have to carry in the coming weeks and months. The raw, unfiltered, ugly pain of a messy divorce and a vicious custody battle is some of the most compelling, yet profoundly difficult drama to watch unfold on screen. It reflects the absolute darkest parts of human nature, the desperate, terrible things we are capable of doing when we feel threatened, cornered, and betrayed. Abby's silent, shaking tears. Devon's stoic, painful, misguided resolve. These are powerful images that will linger in our minds. They are a stark, terrifying testament to the incredibly fragile nature of trust and the absolute, devastating power of betrayal. So, where do they possibly go from here? The judge's eventual ruling will legally dictate the boundaries of their lives, but no court order, no matter how detailed, can fix a completely broken heart or rebuild pulverized trust. Dominic will inevitably grow up caught in the endless crossfire, a living, breathing monument to a great love that failed spectacularly and publicly. Abby will likely retreat deep behind the formidable, protective walls of the Newman Empire, hardening her heart and building armor to ensure she is never, ever vulnerable to that kind of pain again. Devon will have to live every single day with the heavy consequences of his scorched earth tactics, perhaps eventually, painfully realizing that in his desperate quest to save his definition of family, he fundamentally destroyed his home. It's a deeply somber, heartbreaking note to end on, but that is the stark reality of Genoa City today. The drama is intensely real, the pain is almost palpable, and the devastating consequences are entirely permanent. We will continue to watch, to carefully analyze, and to feel every single heartbreak alongside these deeply flawed, deeply human characters. Until next time, please take care of yourselves, hold your loved ones a little closer, communicate openly, and always remember that sometimes the most dangerous, destructive battles are the ones fought within the walls of our own homes.